Hi. So the first thing we want to start off with is I would like to just remind you of one of the principles that we talked about last night, which is that it is your listening that shapes our telling. How you listen is shaping what's happening, what's coming out of our mouths. And so first, I'd like to say that what's been coming out of the mouths of people on this stage has been extraordinary. Every speaker has really opened my heart, opened my mind. I've learned so much from being here. And I would say that's partly because of the listening that you have brought to each speaker. And that's also in large part because of the extraordinary container that has been created here by the staff. So Christian and all the staff of Door, the container has been impeccable. It's felt safe, it's felt welcoming, it's felt generous, it's felt loving. And so as a speaker, all we've had to do is really fall back into the holding space that's been created and are allowed to be our best selves. So that is the first principle that we use in our work, is that we always create an environment in which listening can take place. And we do that by doing an exercise at the start of every workshop called identifying the obstacles to listening. So if you think of your listening as a bowl, there are certain things that might get in the way of your being able to fully listen. And to best illustrate that to you, I'm going to ask you to please take a moment, put down any pen and paper that you have, and if you're willing to, close your eyes. And just take a moment to become aware of your listening. Bring your attention to what's happening inside this room, and only inside this room. See if you can focus your listening on right here in this room, right now. And then expand your listening so that you start to become aware of what's happening outside of this room. And how far out can you extend your listening? Through the whole city of Bucharest and beyond. And then bring your attention to what's happening inside of your body. What's it like to listen from your head, from your brain, with your ears? What's it like to listen with your nose? And how do things change as you start to listen with your throat? Or if you listen with your heart? Or if you listen with your belly, your gut? And can you listen with your whole body? So as I've been speaking, and you now can gently open your eyes, as I've been speaking, and in a workshop we would take longer to do this, but as I've been speaking, you may have become aware of some obstacles to listening, things that get in the way of you being able to be fully present in the moment to what I was saying. So just take a moment to think of the obstacles and turn to someone next to you and just share with them what you became aware of in the obstacles to listening as we did that exercise. Just take a minute to do that. Great.
Okay, so I'm just going to echo what Paul has said about this conference, and would really like to acknowledge you, Christian, who we met at the Metro Diner on the corner of 100th Street and Broadway, New York City, and I would say that our connection was pretty instant. But even with your lucid description of what the Power of Storytelling conference is, I could never have imagined what it actually is to be here and to experience this collective of people who are so willing to come with their listening and their stories. So I'd like to acknowledge you and everyone at Door, all the friends at Door who I've made and we've made, and all our fellow speakers who I feel I've made friends for a long time to come. And all of you, I'd really like to acknowledge all of you for being here and for your interest and for the heartfelt listening that really has made something possible for me that I've never experienced before. So
I just want to point out that what Murray's just done, because I'd like to give you tools as we go along. So the acknowledgement is heartfelt and it's true, and it's also something that really works if you're trying to create an atmosphere of listening. So when you're leading a group, to acknowledge the people who come into the room is very powerful.
And there's always something that you can acknowledge. Always, you know. And there is something about the way that acknowledgement constitutes the listening space that then forms part of the environment that you're going to be talking into. So we have a method. Paul and I, after giving many, many performances of Two Men Talking, had so many hundreds of people coming up to us afterwards wanting to tell their stories or wanting to know how we did it. We formed a company which is called Narrative, N-A-R-A-T-I-V. It stands for Narrative Approaches for Releasing and Transforming Identity and Voice. And it's completely accidental how we came up with the title of the company. Narrative with 2 R's, IVE.com was taken, so we had to find a different way to spell narrative. So our method, which Paul has already explained, rests on the fundamental assumption that there is a reciprocal relationship between listening and telling. And there's a second fundamental assumption, and that is that story is defined as the answer to the question, what happened? So I'll go into that in a moment, but firstly, let me just talk a little bit about that exercise you've just done, which is identifying the obstacles to listening. And we categorized those obstacles into 5 different categories. The one is environmental obstacles. So if there were jackhammers going outside here, or if something loud happened, like fire engines or whatever, there'd be some external obstacles to listening. Also, if the air conditioning wasn't working, as we've often experienced in Zimbabwe and Kenya, where it's been like 103 degrees and no one can listen then. So other kinds of external obstacles. Then there are physiological obstacles. In other words, your own body becomes an obstacle. You might have a headache, a toothache, you might be thirsty, you might want to go to the bathroom, or you might be so sexually attracted to the person sitting next to you that you can't concentrate on anything else. That would be called a physiological obstacle. Then there are basically thoughts, those persistent thoughts that just keep going and going. What am I going to do tomorrow? I've got a deadline on Monday, thinking about the past, thinking about the future. Just thoughts, mental chatter. And then there are emotions too, the emotions and the feelings, which are interconnected with thoughts. And then we have judgments, self-judgments, judgments of others, opinions, assumptions. Just think of what happens when someone is facing you and they belong to the opposite political party that you believe in, and just think of the assumptions that immediately creep into your mind and how difficult it can be to listen to those people. And finally, we talk about relational obstacles to listening. Power relations. A person's power position can really affect the way that you listen to them and they listen to you. So if you think about how you speak to someone in the police force versus talking to your grandmother, well, it depends on what relationship you have with your grandmother, but there are different power relations at play. So we don't have the time to really go through all the principles of narrative's method, but I'm going to just run through them for you. Unfortunately, we don't have a PowerPoint because we rely at narrative on speaking and connecting to the audience, so we don't use PowerPoints. So talking about connecting to the audience. Now, there's an amazing Tibetan Buddhist story that's told by monks, and the story is called The Lion's Gaze. And it goes like this. When you throw a ball at a dog, the dog keeps its eye on the ball. But when you throw a ball to a lion, the lion keeps its gaze on you. The lion's gaze in narrative storytelling method is connection with the audience. Connection with your listeners. That is my lion's gaze. This is all about connecting with you. If I'm not connecting with you, there's just no point. So that's our final principle, connecting with your audience. And our first principle, or our first tool, I should say, or rule, is to answer the question for yourself, why story? Why now? So why use storytelling as a mode of connecting with your audience, as distinct from all the other kinds of ways that you can connect with your audience? Cartoons, pictograms, statistics, charts. Why story and why now? So would you like to talk about what has been our answers over the years to the question, why story, why now?
Yeah. Well, at first, our storytelling came out of a personal need. So as you heard last night, for me, it was the experience of being someone who was living HIV positive in a world in which it was impossible, it felt impossible to talk about. Learning how to tell that, learning how to create a story out of that raw lived experience was important for me. It actually, it contributed to my health to be able to do that. In many ways, I think it's possibly why I'm alive, is that I was able to take the tremendous anxiety that I lived with, and it was immense. I mean, there were times when I would be driving along the highway and I thought that I was going to pass out, I'd have to stop the car. There were times when I was talking to people that they would disappear into a tunnel miles away and I could just see their mouths moving up and down. Tremendous anxiety that eventually, through the telling of the story, allowed that to pass. So it was a personal need, and then what became clear was that it wasn't only me, it was other people who had a story that they needed to tell, and so we could become listeners. And so why story became why listen to story, because people needed to tell that story. And
there have been very different answers to the question, why now? And I would say that every time we agree to do a performance of Two Men Talking, we always have to revisit this question. Why tell the story and why tell it now? I hardly have to go into why we need to tell it now. I mean, when you look at the state of the world, I mean, there's so many reasons why I feel it's really important to tell it now. But, you know, now there's all sorts of different dimensions to it, because right now, in fact, in this very moment, as we're all sitting here, the group Mosaic is assembling at the University Square right here in Bucharest to protest against this new act or referendum that marriage should only belong to a man and a woman. So that's a now that calls me into action in this very moment. So really to be able to ask this question, why now? Why is this the time to tell the story?
And why story is because story, in the way that we describe story, is what happened. Nobody can argue with that. People can argue about what their beliefs are or their opinions are, but nobody can argue with me about what happened to me. That is just what happened to me. So when you tell people what happened to you, really is a very powerful way of describing your experience and letting the people that you're describing it to come to their own conclusions.
So the next rule of thumb is what we did with you earlier, which is identify the obstacles to listening. Now, I don't know what it's like for you journalists when you have to go and interview someone who you profoundly disagree with, or who might really cause a tremendous emotional reaction in you because of the way that they speak or think. And how are you going to listen to their story? I mean, how are you going to actually get past what could be a very visceral feeling when you're with them? So what we say is that identifying the obstacles to listening is just becoming aware of what those obstacles are. And developing that increasing awareness also gives you some kind of power, some kind of agency to be able to let those obstacles go to the best of your ability. The obstacles are never wrong. Don't ever judge what obstacles occur. It's just about noticing them and releasing them to the best of your ability.
I'd like to tell a little story about that. So Murray and I went to work with people with intellectual disabilities in Croatia. And people in Zagreb with intellectual disabilities had been kept in institutions for many, many years. And there's a movement of deinstitutionalizing people and incorporating them back into the communities. And we were asked to come in and do a storytelling workshop to work with people who themselves had intellectual disabilities so that media could be created that would show why these people belonged in the world. And there were to be stories of ordinary life and not stories of the horrors of the institutions. So in order to work with them, we were asked to come out 2 weeks before and meet with the social workers who were the gatekeepers for the people that we were going to be working with. In fact, the people themselves ran the organization, the social workers worked for them, but they were the gatekeepers. So before we left, we were told by someone who we trusted that it would be a very bad idea for us to let them know, these social workers, that we were gay. That it would be a bad idea because they wouldn't really, we never know how people think, it's a conservative country, and it wouldn't be the best idea. And then I said, well, maybe we'll talk about me being HIV positive as a way. And they said, no, really not a good idea. That would be terrible. They'll never listen to you, so don't. So we went, okay, so we're going to go. So we go, and we sit down with a man and a woman, and they ask us, well, what brings you here, and what qualifies you to come and lead a storytelling workshop? Have you worked with people with intellectual disabilities before? So we look at each other, and I said, well, I am a psychiatrist. They looked at us with wide open eyes and said, that is the worst thing that you could say. Do you not understand? These people have been living in institutions. The people who have been the most brutal towards them have been the psychiatrists. So that doesn't work with us. What qualifies you? What is it about you? Tell us something personal about yourself. So I can't remember exactly. Murray said something about he likes to
go hiking.
He likes to go hiking. And I said, I like to read books. That's it. And they're looking at us increasingly skeptically. And eventually they said, look, not sure that this is going to work. And we could just feel it. We said, well, could we come and see the place where the people live? They said, no, I don't think it's such a good idea. We need to talk to our supervisors. We'll get back to you. This was going really badly. And Murray turned to me at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of this day, and he said to me, we've got nothing to lose. Let's just tell them everything, the whole thing. So we said to them, can we go for a drink? Let's go. We went to a little coffee shop. We sat down, and we told them our story, the story we told you last night. And by the end, they were both tears rolling down their faces. They'd never met a person with HIV before. But they said, well, that's what qualifies you to come. Tomorrow morning, please come to the place. We welcome you in. So, the obstacle to listening, we had created actually an obstacle to our own listening of ourselves. This woman who had told us to be so careful had created a listening shape that was so narrow that we couldn't possibly inhabit it. And so once we gave ourselves permission, things opened up.
Great example. Thanks, Paul. So, okay, so we heard quite a few examples yesterday of the next rule of thumb. So it's why story, why now? It's identify the obstacle to listening and release the obstacles to listening. And the next step in our method is to remember your heritage. Now, we heard a lot of that yesterday. Nicole remembered her heritage. Mindy remembered her heritage. Sarah, you remembered your heritage of you told the story of why you became a journalist. And there's something about invoking not just your personal history of your family, but invoking your heritage, all the people that came before you that made the space for you to be who you are right now. There is something about remembering that opens up your heart. And if we're not interested in opening up our hearts, then I personally don't understand why we would be bothering with storytelling at all. Because for me, storytelling is very much about connecting with people, not only their minds, but their hearts. In fact, I don't even see them as separate, but how easy it is for the heart to close, particularly when one's feeling angry or resentful or just seized by the injustice around us. So going back to your own heritage and thinking about the people who made it possible for you to be able to tell your story is a step towards opening your heart. And when I think about the people who have made me aware of my own heritage, one of them is Harry Hay, who was one of the founders of the Mattachine Society, really the precursor to gay liberation on the planet. And Harry Hay told me and Paul that that we belong to a lineage of gay men. And until Harry Hay told us that, I'd never really thought of being gay as inheriting any kind of heritage. So I think it's really an inquiry in a way as well to think about what is your heritage.
I mean, what Harry Hay said, which was so powerful for us, was he said, and whether you agree with him or not, it's what happened. He said this. He said, we are a different people. He said, our people have always been the peacemakers because we do not carry weapons. He said, our people have always been the ones who negotiate between warring tribes. If you look back into history, it was the gay men who walked from warring tribe to create peace because they didn't carry weapons. And he said the gay women were the mothers to the mothers. He said they had a sacred role in the communities. Now, whether or not any of that is true, what it did was it created a lineage that we came from that was very empowering, so much more empowering than the voices of self-loathing and of marginalization that we had come to think of as gay men.
So, now comes the hard part. Now is getting down to telling the story. The what happened method is, as the people who came to our workshop know this morning know, what happened means you've got to be able to hear it, see it, smell it, taste it, and touch it, as in tactile touch, not as in feeling. Everything else in the what happened method is excluded. So in what happened storytelling, you don't offer any judgments, you don't offer any opinions, criticisms, editorials, or statements of feeling. You have to find an empirical way of telling your story. So it has to be told according to the five senses. Dialogue is okay. what someone said, what I said and what someone said. But an opinion, such as all Americans who voted for Trump are idiots, is not considered what happened storytelling. That's considered to be an opinion. And what happens when you give someone your opinion? When you give someone your opinion, what you are inviting, in a way, is a counter-opinion. So you're either inviting agreement or disagreement. But as I discovered with my clients in the AIDS program back in the early 90s, when I heard just what happened to them, and when they told me just what happened to them, there was no room for disagreement or agreement. It's just what happened to them. Now, there may be judgments about what happened to people, but there can't be disagreements and agreements. So we stay away from opinions and we stay away from statements of feeling. Rather, we want to feel what we're feeling when we're telling our story, and this particularly applies to oral storytelling. Feel the feelings, but don't talk about them. Allow your audience to feel it with you. And, just borrowing from the very basic techniques of making cinema, as Pat, also presented to us yesterday with podcasting, is show, don't tell. Use specific details. Take us into the inner world of the character and the outer world of the character through revealing these specific details. So this is something that takes us sometimes days and weeks to work through with the people in our workshops.
And part of that is that specificity about what happened to you is actually what connects. We often think that we have to become more general to connect, because you don't know Johannesburg. So if I say to you, I drove my car up Munro Drive, which I said to you last night, most of you have not been to Johannesburg, most of you do not know Munro Drive. But it's a very specific example of what happened to me. And I would guess that it evokes something for each of you, something different, but that really allows you your own creativity as listeners. Whereas if I were to say to you, there is a road in Johannesburg which is named Munro Drive, it's a beautiful road, it goes up, you lose your own capacity to dream or to imagine as I'm speaking.
Find your ending. Find your ending. Land that story, This is contrary to in some ways, to our psyches as human beings. We don't want to end things because endings, of course, remind us of our own endings. We're born and we die. And the story's ongoing anyway. So how do you end a story that is still continuing? It's artificial, but you have to find that ending. And it's the ending that allows you to land the story, particularly, again, when you're telling stories like we are as oral storytellers. It's like a pilot. We've got a pilot in the room somewhere here. You take off, and you've got to know where you're heading. When you take your plane off and you fly into the sky, you point the nose of that plane towards its direction, and you know exactly where you're going to land, which is what gives the flight its direction. So it's the same with storytelling. The minute you start telling that story, you've got to know where you're headed. That's what keeps you from becoming digressive, what keeps you from being vague, and it also lands that story, resolves that story in the listening and the minds of your listeners.
Yeah. So I think we are coming into land with this story. Are we?
Is that my phone?
No. So before we do, I'm just thinking how we should end. How do you want to end? Oh, I know how I want to end. I have an idea. So what I wanted to let you know is that we have So we've created this methodology for teaching storytelling, and it's the same wherever we go. We bring our storytelling, and we honor anybody as the experts in their lives. So whether it's people with AIDS or people with intellectual disabilities, or next week we'll be spending the week with people involved in Roma health and advocacy, we are not experts in those fields. But what we do is we bring the method together with the expertise of the people, and people create stories to use in whatever way they want to. And we have, our company Narrative does online storytelling trainings, so there'll be some leaflets outside which you can look at and see about the next online training that Murray will be leading in November. And we'd love to have you on those trainings as they go forward, to really learn and practice your own storytelling about your own lives.
So these workshops that we run are conducted on Zoom, which is a platform for video conferencing, and people join in from all over the world, and it really is quite amazing to see what can happen in terms of creating global community through these video platforms. Anyway, anyone who's at this conference, I would love to see you at this online course, and like Paul said, there are the flyers outside, and we're offering a 25% discount. But I want to say that if there's anyone here, and I know that this is a lot of money for people in Romania, if there's anyone here who really wants to do the workshop, I do not want money to get in the way of your ability to do it. So do write to us at Narrative and let us know that you want to do it, and we'll work with whatever you can do. So would love to see you there.
Thank you.